Hi, my name is Nate Flynn, and I'm going to be going over my analysis and discussion of magnesium supplementation and its relation to cardiac function and health. So the overview of my presentation, this is how it's going to go. It's going to start with talking about what is magnesium and how does it work within our body. And then we're going to talk about how does magnesium deficiency affect the body. Then we're going to talk about what systems of our body and health issues benefit from magnesium supplementation and sufficient magnesium body levels. Then I'm going to go over some related research studies. And then I'm going to talk about some safe and proper ways to intake magnesium and add it into your diet. So magnesium, it's an essential mineral that is needed in order for our body to carry out many necessary processes. And essential just means that the mineral must come from foods, liquids, or supplements we take, as opposed to a non-essential mineral, which our body can create on its own. So essential, we have to get from our diet or some outside source than our body, because our body can't make it. Magnesium is a cofactor in over 300 enzymatic reactions in our body, which means that it's an inorganic substance that helps control and carry out chemical reactions. It's also specifically important within reactions that allow our cardiovascular system to run smoothly, and it's very important in cellular processes. So a healthy person has anywhere between 22 and 26 grams of magnesium within their body. A little over half of it is stored within our bones, while the other half is in our soft tissues and organs. About 1% or less is contained within our blood serum. A study in 2018 from the Journal of American Osteopathic Association found that around 50% of Americans are magnesium deficient, which was surprising to me because that's a really high number. And a lot of people don't realize that they might be magnesium deficient. And I'm going to touch on this study a little later in the presentation. So the RDA is a recommended daily allowance. For women, that recommended daily allowance is 320 milligrams per day. And for men, it's 420 milligrams per day. Pregnant women should increase their RDA or recommended daily allowance by around 40 milligrams a day. And kids usually have a much lower RDA until they reach puberty, and then it peaks. Magnesium deficiency is a severe problem with over 50% of Americans having this issue. And it's been linked to an increase in the likelihood of many diseases. Moderate to high deficiencies have also been associated with chronic inflammatory stress, which can play a part in osteoporosis, high blood pressure, atherosclerosis, diabetes, cancer, and obesity. Magnesium plays a role in muscle contraction, neural conduction, blood sugar regulation, heart contractility, blood pressure regulation, and other parts of our body. It also plays a part in cellular energy production, bone development, and ionic transport within the cell. To the right, you can see a figure, and it outlines how cells use magnesium to produce usable energy. ATP is it's morphed into ADP, which has 2 phosphates compared to ATP with 3. And that splicing of that phosphate allows for usable energy for the cell, and magnesium helps in this process. So magnesium deficiency in the cardiovascular system. Magnesium is an essential mineral for cardiovascular function. So magnesium deficiency plays a very important part into like the decline of the cardiovascular system. The activation of ATP into usable energy, which I just talked about, is an important mechanism for an intracellular pump known as the sodium-potassium pump, which pumps potassium into the cell and sodium out of it. This pump is essential for heart contraction. Deficiency in magnesium can lead to a decrease in potassium and an increase in sodium, which is contrary to what the sodium-potassium pump is supposed to do and what we want. And this can inhibit permeability of ions, and it can hinder the pump from working correctly. And this is linked to heart arrhythmias. There's adrenal gland hormones, also known as catecholamines, can lead to myocardial damage and cardiomyopathies in magnesium deficient people. Also, especially when combined with alcoholism, magnesium deficiency can have an effect on someone's electrocardiograph, which analyzes normal heart rhythm, and that it can skew the normal heart rhythm. Magnesium deficiency not only increases sodium levels within the cell, but also calcium. This calcium buildup can lead to calcification or hardening of the blood vessels, which could increase the risk of atherosclerosis and hypertension. It can also lead to vasospasms and vasoconstriction, which causes blood vessels to narrow and increases blood pressure. An interesting finding that I saw in that study that found that 50% of Americans of magnesium, 50% of Americans are magnesium deficient, was that vitamin D cannot be metabolized by the body without a sufficient amount of total body magnesium. It's actually somewhat unsafe to take vitamin D while being deficient in magnesium, because vitamin D can increase calcium and phosphate levels, which can result in increased vascular calcification through deposits of minerals on the vessel walls of the arteries. This can increase the risk of atherosclerosis, the buildup of plaque, the hardening of the vessel walls. But with magnesium supplementation, vitamin D can carry out its normal beneficial functions of calcium absorption and immune system upkeep. So magnesium is crucial in the regulation and effectiveness of vitamin D. Congestive heart failure patients tend to have higher rates of magnesium deficiency because of their increased urinary excretion, elevated aldosterone, and the use of diuretics. A study from the Office of Dietary Supplements found that loop and thiazide diuretics can actually increase magnesium loss through urine and cause deficiency faster. Magnesium deficiency creates a positive feedback loop and worsens this hyperaldosteronism. This leads to increased fluid retention, which is very bad. It's the opposite of what you want if you have congestive heart failure, hence why people are on diuretics. Magnesium depletion also weakens cardiac contractility, and it increases vasoconstriction and lowers cardiac energy stores, which are all severe risk factors when someone has congestive heart failure. Atherosclerosis, like we said, magnesium deficiency hardens the arteries, vasoconstriction becomes a problem. There's also a role in lipoprotein metabolism that magnesium plays. So without magnesium being sufficiently in your system, there's going to be a problem with controlling your cholesterol levels. This can also lead to increased LDL in your system, which is a huge risk factor for atherosclerosis. Also, magnesium deficiency hinders and activates a lot of genetic factors that induce atherogenesis or plaque buildup within the arteries. Magnesium has many antioxidant properties, and when magnesium levels are depleted, reactive oxidative species can increase oxidative stress, which leads to myocardial injury. Oxidative stress is basically like the presence of free radicals or atoms with unpaired electrons that are very unstable and cause cellular damage. Magnesium deficiency also has been linked to endothelial dysfunction and vasoconstriction, like we said, and this elevates the risk of thrombosis and potentially a stroke. It also increases the chance of a hemorrhage through blood pressure rising and blood vessel stiffness. A study by Amighi et al. Found that low serum magnesium levels correlated with increased neurological damage 48 hours after the onset of an acute ischemic stroke. Some of the health benefits and disease risk reduction associated with magnesium sufficiency Magnesium affects arterial smooth muscle contraction. It also stimulates vasodilation through the production of nitric oxide, which is a natural vasodilator. When magnesium is sufficient, calcium is also properly removed from the cell, preventing hardening of the arteries. It also aids in lipoprotein metabolism, which decreases the risk of high cholesterol levels. And magnesium also aids in antioxidant and anti-inflammatory functions. Magnesium deficiency related to diabetes has to do with if you have a high sucrose diet and are magnesium deficient, there is found to be an increase in oxidative stress. That's those free radicals that lead to cellular damage through something called lipid peroxidation, which creates a hostile environment because of these free radicals. Blood sugar control is improved with magnesium supplementation because it lowers the oxidative stress because of its antioxidant properties, and it also lowers the levels of C-reactive protein, which is an indicator of inflammation in the blood vessels. A long-term study for Alzheimer's by Ozawa et al. Examined a large population of 60 or older people in Japan who did not previously have diagnosed dementia. It was a long-term study, and their diets were assessed and analyzed based on their intake of magnesium, potassium, and calcium. After 17 years, they reconvened with all the population to come up with the final data and observations. And they analyzed based on their intake of magnesium, potassium, and calcium. The higher their diets were in with magnesium, potassium, and calcium, the lower their risk of dementia or severity of dementia was. And there was a significant inverse relationship between the diet being high in those micronutrients and low levels of dementia, if any dementia at all. It also seemed to be the lower the intake of the micronutrients, the higher the rate of dementia was. Although there are other micronutrients involved and not just magnesium, I still think there's something to take away from this. And that's a very interesting study to look at. For stroke, magnesium plays a role in blood pressure and its anti-inflammatory, antiplatelet, and vasodilatory effects. It can aid in the decreased risk of a stroke due to decreased blood vessel stiffness, decreased blood pressure, increased smooth muscle contraction in the arteries. And for diabetes, magnesium plays a large role in glucose and insulin metabolism. It helps glucose move out of the bloodstream and into the cells, and also plays a large role in the secretion of insulin. This is important for type 2 diabetics. For myocardial infarctions, magnesium causes coronary vasodilation and reduced vascular resistance, which allows for greater blood flow and oxygen allowance. It protects cells from ischemia or a lack of oxygen and reperfusion, which would put cardiac cells under stress. So magnesium allows cardiac cells to get more oxygen, which in myocardial infarctions, the lack of oxygen causes cardiac cells to die, and this is how people have a heart attack. So one study I came across was a hypertension study, and it was a meta-analysis published in 2016 in the American Heart Association Journal by Zhang et al. It analyzed the effects of magnesium supplementation on blood pressure in 34 randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials. Collectively, there were 2,028 adults between the age of 18 and 84. There was almost an even split of subjects receiving magnesium supplementation and subjects receiving a placebo. Everyone in the study was either normotensive or hypertensive, with no pregnant, recently pregnant women, no one with any severe illness or disease, no one that took any supplements that could affect blood pressure or magnesium levels. And there were slightly more women involved in this study. Overall, it was found that there was a decrease in systolic blood pressure by 2 millimeters per mercury and a decrease in diastolic blood pressure by 1.78 millimeters of mercury. In adults 65 years or older, an average systolic blood pressure decrease of 2.6 millimeters per mercury was found, and an average diastolic blood pressure decrease of 3 millimeters per mercury was seen. Subjects who were previously hypertensive showed an even greater decrease in systolic and diastolic blood pressure than normotensive subjects. I thought this was really interesting. While 2 millimeters of mercury and 1.78 millimeters of mercury might not seem like a huge difference for just magnesium supplementation, dropping blood pressure this significantly, it seems like a very easy solution to improving your cardiovascular system. This study had a ton of data in it, and I couldn't include all of the data collected because it was massive, but there's a lot of interesting parts to this study that I'd love to talk about if you're interested. Here's a chart they use in the study, and this is for overall systolic blood pressure on your left and overall diastolic blood pressure on your right. And this is the change in that blood pressure related to the change of serum magnesium, which is magnesium levels seen in the bloodstream. So as you see on the left, there's a downward sloping trend line between all the dots, which represent trial results. And as you increase in the amount of serum magnesium within your blood, you find that more studies found that there was a higher decrease in systolic blood pressure. And the same goes for diastolic, which actually even has a larger trend line sloping down that we see here. Another study I found was a study that aimed at using magnesium sulfate for prevention of post-operative atrial fibrillation in patients undergoing coronary artery bypass grafting, or CABG. AFib is a common occurrence 1 to 4 days after CABG, and it's most common on the second day. Post-operative AFib is not linked to high mortality, but it is associated with increased risk to post-operative stroke, hemodynamic compromise, ventricular arrhythmias, and an increased length of stay in the hospital. This study took 234 CABG patients, and they were all went through surgery with the same surgeon at the same hospital within the same year. There was an average age of 62 years old, and slightly more men participated. 99 of these patients were in the magnesium group, and 135 were placed in a placebo group. For the magnesium group, they received 2 grams of magnesium sulfate during operation and post-operation through an IV or intravenously for 1 hour every 12 hours for 2 consecutive days post-operation. Subjects had to be over 18 with no history of AFib, CABG, valve replacement, or dialysis. The results showed that 37% of the placebo group fell into AFib post-operation, while 24% of the magnesium group did not. This data is statistically significant, and on this slide, you can see that post-operative AF, or atrial fibrillation, the parentheses number shows 37 for the control group and 24 for the magnesium group, and that's the percentage of people that fell into this atrial fibrillation post-operation. And the p-value being under 0.05 shows that it is statistically significant and would be considered valid within the scientific community. The rest are interesting to look at, LOS being length of stay, but according to the p-value, they are not statistically significant, so we can't look at them as valid, but it's cool to just look at them and see what's happening there, because the magnesium group is lower in all except death in the hospital. So on to safe and proper intake methods of magnesium. So it's important to remember that magnesium supplementation probably shouldn't be the first step in increasing your magnesium intake. A lot of healthy foods can be implemented into the diet that are high in magnesium and can definitely get you to that daily requirement. And they're also really like these foods are good for you, and it would be healthy to also just be eating them in general. For example, whole grains like wheat bran and whole grain bread, and a lot of cereals are fortified and have a lot of magnesium in them. Dark leafy greens such as spinach, nuts like almonds, legumes, and potatoes. White potatoes are high in magnesium. Um, Magnesium supplementation is helpful when your diet is low in magnesium containing foods. Uh, be careful taking magnesium supplements along with multivitamins because multivitamins usually have a high amount of magnesium in them already. If you do take both at the same time, you're not going to go into magnesium toxicity per se, but you always want to consult with your doctor before taking any supplementation anyways. So it's water, which I didn't know. There is hard and soft water, and everyone's tap water is either hard or soft. Hard water is water that has a high mineral content, and it usually contains magnesium ions within it. And there's ways you can tell. It often has like an almost like minerally metally-ish taste. And then it's formed when water flows through limestone, stone, and chalk. And soft water has considerably less mineral content. And wherever you live, there's different mineral contents in waters, different types of waters. So that's something you could look into depending on where your tap's from. Magnesium toxicity, obviously too much of anything can be bad. A magnesium supplement does not need to exceed 350 milligrams normally. Usually, if you're going to buy a supplement of magnesium, it's between 200 and 250 milligrams. Anything can become toxic and lead to detrimental health factors if you overuse it. Also, magnesium. Also, if magnesium is not filtered properly by the body, then it could become a problem. It's a rare event within the general public, but there are higher risk communities like people with chronic kidney disease or conditions have issues with magnesium toxicity because the kidney filters and excretes magnesium. Magnesium filtration and excretion is only inhibited when the kidney cannot remove more than 30 milliliters per minute of creatinine, which is a waste product. With that low of a creatinine excretion, usually patients have or people have pretty bad kidney disease at that point. Patients on dialysis are at high risk. Some other high risk populations are people undergoing cancer treatments and women receiving preeclampsia treatment. Hypermagnesemia, which is increased magnesium to the point of toxicity, is more prevalent in hospitals than the general public. Like I said, any supplement or medication, you should ask your doctor and do some research before jumping into and taking. So that's my presentation. Some takeaways are magnesium deficiency is very dangerous to your health and well-being when severe to moderate, and you should start looking into what foods do I eat that are high in magnesium, and consider maybe adding magnesium foods to your diet and possibly even supplementing magnesium. It's an easily overlooked micronutrient, and it's not that hard to add into your diet if you want to, because the benefits are worth it. And then always check with your doctor for starting a new supplement or medication. But thank you. That's my presentation. Here are my references, and I hope you enjoyed.